e-commerce brands, it's no longer optional to not master your supply chain. With so many options existing and the increased complexity in today's environment, this video is going to be the end-to-end guide of how we move our inventory from factory all the way to the customer's doorstep. My name is Jassim Isa. I'm the CEO and founder of Videra. We've shipped over 1 million products last year to customers through many marketplaces, Amazon, Walmart, Target, even direct-to-consumer Shopify stuff. And I'm going to walk you through, after a decade of experience, the process that we go through at various steps, either whether it exists domestically, internationally, mistakes that we've learned, and how to transfer inventory for various marketplaces. Why supply chain matters so much. So the e-commerce world is only about two things, if you want to put it simply, and I've heard this many times and I like it a lot. It's about selling stuff and moving stuff. I've done a lot of videos about selling stuff, advertising, SEO, creatives, all that kind of stuff. But the part a lot of people forget about is the complexity of moving stuff. What makes e-commerce so special nowadays is the convenience, and the convenience of getting something so fast. So 2, 3, 4 days and everything that goes with that. But there's so many factors to consider within that. So time of shipping, inventory availability. If you have no inventory available, the selling the stuff, the ads, the creative, they're all irrelevant if you're out of stock, and you're actually going to lose it over the long run. So inventory availability is obviously so crucial. Inventory speed is so crucial, but also what's hidden underneath that is the margin, and the margin erosion that can happen if you don't plan things properly, if you're staging things at the wrong place, all that kind of stuff. So if you optimize your supply chain properly, you're going to also notice a significant improvement in margin, and I'll be mentioning that in the various stages that we go through right now. So let's go over the step-by-step process from taking our product, the product journey, all the way from the factory to our customer at the end of the day. So we have obviously the product journey in the middle. So this is our product moving from one place to another. So for this one, we're going to just keep it simple. We're going to have the factory here. And then obviously at the end, we're going to have the customer. And then beneath that, we have the certain marketplace, because each marketplace has different, we have to accommodate our supply chain and product journey for various marketplaces. And then we have methods. So that's either air, ground, and within methods, we have service providers. So that could be UPS, AGL, and we'll get also into all of those, along with the pros and cons of each option and when to use each one, of course. So let's start with the factory. So many brands manufacture their product overseas, especially if you're in the US. That includes China, Vietnam, a lot of other options, Mexico, etc., Pakistan. So this product is mostly produced internationally. If it's not, it's produced domestically. Then I'll explain that in the next step. But basically, I'm assuming that the product is produced internationally. And then is there an instance where it goes directly from factory internationally to customer? Yes, there actually is. And that is where we see Temu and Shein flourish. Now they're obviously not doing as well because of the exception, de minimis exception, it went away. But they were using this route. And what method of transportation were they using? They were using basically, that's Temu, Shein. They were using either air carriers to get it to a local UPS hub, or they were using air cargo. And then they were shipping pallets, and the pallets, obviously, it depends on the speed time, but this would usually take 2 to 7 days. And that's the reason they were so cheap, is because there wasn't a lot of middlemen, but two, they were getting tariff exemptions. They didn't have to go through tariffs, which we'll mention shortly. But usually that's not the case. Usually there's a staging area. So after the factory or manufacturer produces your product, it has to go through ports, obviously. So here's ports, and I'll explain that later. I'll explain that right now. And then from the ports, obviously goes to the staging section. And I'll get into the staging section shortly. So for the ports, how is it shipped from the manufacturer to the ports? There's numerous options. I'm going to get into them all briefly. The most common are FCL and LCL. So FCL is full container load. So it's either 40 cubic container or 20 cubic container most of the time. So that means you filled up a container on your own, and you're shipping it directly from the factory all the way to the staging area. But before it goes to the staging area, it has to go through the port. The other option is less than container load. So this is where you share a 20 or 40 foot, usually 40 foot cubic container with other people. So you kind of take a certain area of it and you're charged for that. And then outside of these two, obviously, if you're running short on time, and that's why I explained maximizing supply chain is so efficient, because ideally you want to use these. They're much more cost effective, but you might also have to use air cargo or air freight. So air freight is just basically shipping pallets through airplanes, and then air cargo shipping packages through airplanes. So that's another option to get it from the factory, but it's obviously much more expensive, but it's much more faster. So when do you use it? You're running out of stock. We had to use it for a product recently where a promotion went really well. We ran out of stock. We under budgeted. This option right here was 3 to 4 weeks. This option here was less than 2 weeks, sometimes obviously faster. While we're doing this, it's also really important to know that while it goes through the ports, there's various methods of shipping from the factory to staging. So there's Xworks, FOB, and DDP. These all have their own ramifications. I'm not going to get into it right now. This is probably going to need a 15-minute video on its own, but just know that it's very crucial. So now also, while we're shipping FCL and LCL, Amazon has a really cool program. It's known as AGL. So this is now we're getting into providers. I'm not going to mention providers too thoroughly. We have our list of freight forwarders. We have a dozen, depending on the situation, for each situation. But one provider that's very common and frequent is AGL, Amazon Global Logistics. They're very affordable. They're a little bit slower, but they're actually, to be fair to them, they're very affordable. We use them frequently. And there's also another advantage to AGL in the staging process that I'll get into a little bit from now. But they also offer, obviously, freight shipping through the ports. They also do the bonding for you. So it's a fairly convenient option. I promise I'm not paid anything to do this. But we've used it and we've had a good experience with it so far. So then we're getting into the staging area. Now it gets complex. So the staging area is where you really have to consider marketplace. The most common marketplace is going to be either D2C, so your Shopify website, etc., your direct to customer platform, or Amazon. So now if you're using Amazon, there's two options for staging. There's AWD, there's FBA. Now, if you're going direct to customer, you can also use FBA, and you can use a program called MCF. This is a program where Amazon lets you leverage its existing facilities to ship to your own customers, and you can even ship them in a brown box. You don't have to get it with the Amazon basically package. Now, if you're shipping D2C, obviously then we have other options for staging, your own internal warehouse, and then you obviously have 3PLs as well. Another more recent, it's not too recent, but it's fairly recent, a couple of years, is WFS, Walmart Fulfillment Services. In an attempt to compete with FBA, it's a Walmart version of FBA. I think it also actually offers MCF, and I think they have better pricing. I have to obviously confirm the semantics. It varies for like size and different options, but these are the most common staging solutions for your inventory. Now, when do you use each one? AWD, you use it pairs really well with AGL. The reason is you can save on inbound placement fees, and they also offer a discount if you use this combo package. You can still ship AGL to FBA, but you can't ship AGL, at least not yet, to warehouse 3PLs or WFS. So if you're planning to ship to these three options, you should consider a freight forwarder, an external freight forwarder, obviously. And AGL actually doesn't just ship to the US, they just also expanded 6 other countries. Now, when do you ship AGL to FBA? That's usually when AWD could be backed up, you want to get it to FBA faster, all that kind of options. That's when you ship AGL directly to FBA. And another option too for even, and I'll get into a brief story here, is let's say there's kind of loopholes. So let's say you did want inventory in your own warehouse, because the MCF option, so actually let me reverse a little bit. So let's say you wanted, just theoretically, you wanted products into your own warehouse, but AGL was offering you a crazy rate, and you also wanted them at Amazon. One mistake that we did in the past that we're never going to repeat again is we basically had a 40-foot cubic container, and we could have shipped that AGL to AWD, all of it together. But instead, we put 10 cubic feet on the side. We shipped that LCL through a different freight forwarder to our warehouse, and we shipped the AGL, the 30 cubic foot, to Amazon. This was very costly. Instead, what we do now is we ship the 40 cubic foot all to one place, such as AWD, and AWD has an option called MCD, multi-channel distribution. And with that option, we can ship MCD, we can ship pallets of inventory from AWD to our warehouse, to 3PLs, to even WFCs, WFS, and other options. We basically ship a pallet of inventory to various places from AWD, and it's fairly affordable. Obviously, affordable is relevant depending on the inventory, but we started doing that. It's a cost savings of around thousands of dollars. So this is one of the cost savings that we recently implemented. But again, this is very dynamic. Right now, it's a cost saving. AGL pricing might go up. We're going to use a freight forwarder. They're going to beat the prices. So we're always asking for quotes. That's one of the pro tip. If you're listening to this, always quote. Don't get complacent with a certain provider. Make them compete against each other and make them earn your business. And the bigger you get, the more courageous and brave you can be with discounts. So then over here, you're at the staging option. And then right here, we have obviously last mile delivery, what's known as last mile delivery. This option, it's really tough to beat Amazon FBA in this. They have 1 or 2 day shipping times for most of the zip codes of the United States. 1 day actually for most, but almost all of them are 2 day shipping. So if you wanted to compete with that, let's say obviously we said the method is last mile delivery. It's gonna be mostly through ground. And actually I wanted to mention something here. When it arrives to the port, you also have to ship it from the port to the staging area, depending on if the EXW, DDP, FOB, who the responsibility lies on. But it has to go from one of the ports, and the ports exist in LAX, JFK, ORD if they're coming through air. Those are the most common airports. But if it's coming through sea, which is obviously more common, you're looking at LA, Miami, New York, New Jersey. So those are where most of the ports exist. And that's at the port is where you're going to get the tariffs, the duties, the customs, all that kind of stuff is where it's going to happen here, the paperwork. And that's also another pro tip. You can see how many stopping locations we have here. That's why you have to plan your supply chain thoroughly. Any of these, there can be a delay, and especially this one. Your inventory could stay here for a couple weeks if you get chosen for an audit, and it's random. So you have to prepare ahead. That's why safety stock is important. You can't JIT, just in time, is much more difficult when you're looking at this option. So sorry, going back here, basically to the port option and shipping, we also have from here we have FTL, LTL. And then we also have something that's much less known, but we have used it in the past, which is rail. So when you're at the rails, this is using trains. They're very cheap. And that's why you also have to plan supply chain effectively. They could be cheaper than, so FTL is full. So same as here, but just the difference is instead of sea, now we're not talking about containers, we're talking about truckloads. So this is a full truckload, 40 cubic foot. This is a shared truckload. So you have pallets on a truckload with other people. And this is rail. You can obviously also ship it ground, but that's crazy expensive. It's very rare that you're going to need to do that unless there's like a bundle that you want to make. Rarely, we had to do it like 3-4 years ago because we wanted to test out a sample and we wanted to quickly deliver it for one of our partners. But it's very rare that you have to ship it through ground through here. And you can obviously mix and match. So you can send some of them LTL and some of them rail if you need some more quickly. And that's why, again, I repeat, dynamic supply chain is so crucial. So you're shipping from the port to the staging area. And then through the staging, you can also experience a DC here. If, for example, what we have done in the past, we received them at one of our 5 warehouses. And then we shipped it to FBA. We shipped some to WFS. And we shipped some to our 3PL. And why would you use a 3PL if we have a warehouse? We stored inventory there. So we have a lot of partnered carrier 3PLs, dozens across the United States. They're very close to some of the ports we work with on unique products. So we utilize them for storage. We obviously trust them, worked with them for years. So this could be an additional layer of complexity, but you can also obviously jump from here to here. So just as we jumped from the factory to the customer, you can also, usually you're going from staging to, what's it called? But distribution center is also AWD going to FBA because AWD drip feeds inventory into FBA. You have the option to do it automatically. So when you're shipping from your warehouse to here, also these options become relevant again. But there's another option that's common because now you're shipping less. You're going to hear about it's SPD, small parcel delivery. So this is what's commonly known as basically individual packages, etc. So now It's getting really messy. Now, when we're shipping through here or shipping through here, they're the same methods of transportation. 99.9% of the time, it's going to be ground delivery. Now, it still might be a pallet. It still might be LTL, where you're shipping a pallet. How can it be LTL? Let's say, for example, we had to ship a fridge in the past or tires in the past. They're so big that we still use a pallet to ship them because it's cheaper. But like I said, 99.9% of the time, you're shipping ground. And then the options, the three providers are the most common ones, are UPS, USPS, and FedEx. And then obviously, if you're using Amazon or Walmart, FBA and WFS, they deal with these. They either drop them off directly, but sometimes they also use these providers, because if you're shipping it to FBA, they're handling the last mile delivery to the customer. But sometimes we do seller fulfilled or merchant fulfilled, and we're shipping it directly. Or if you're shipping to D2C, your own customers, then you're using your 3PL or your own warehouses to ship directly to customer and navigate that situation on your own. So when you're looking at so each provider has their own benefits. For example, USPS, we ship a lot of books. Media, they have used basically is around $4 each. So we utilize them. Obviously, again, this is rule of thumb. Don't take anything for granted. But then UPS, FedEx, depending on zip code, we also compete them against each other. We see ShipStation is a really good provider that gives good rates. This, again, we're not paid by them, but we have used them in the past. And I think Pirate Ship was the other one. We like those two a lot. They give us fairly competitive rates, UPS and FedEx. My logistics person knows the account managers there, but I just get the data, and that's usually what we're using. So now, obviously, we're getting the product to the customer. That's where our end goal is. So that's kind of the full cycle. One thing that's very important to mention is that although you can technically use FBA, warehouse, and WFS, for example, to stage products, it's very cost ineffective. Staging and storing, those facilities, if your own warehouse, you're going to be charged a lot. So that's why we like to use basically our warehouse and the FBA centers and Walmart fulfillment centers simply for distribution centers. The same thing for 3PLs. 3PLs, technically, you can use it both, because some 3PLs are specialized and they have areas for staging that's very cheap for storage, but they also have different areas that are more utilized for shipping directly to customers. So that's where in staging, you have the option, you still have AWB, and you have obviously 3PLs. And then obviously if you have your own huge warehouse, 300,000, 400,000 square feet, you're getting very cheap rates for storage. You can use that. But a lot of 3PLs that we work with, we're only paying maybe 10 to 15 bucks a month per pallet for storage. So it's very cheap. It's very hard to be when you're operating out of distribution centers that are specialized for shipping and moving employees within it. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes these 3PLs are not heated, for example, they're not air conditioned, so they can store products at a very cheap rate, and they also have a lot of areas. So that's very important to keep in mind. So we did mention obviously the factory, then we have the ports. From the ports, I go to the staging center, then the staging center to the distribution centers. So distribution centers, we have FBA, AWD drip feeds into FBA, but you can also send from the 3PL to FBA, obviously, or from your own warehouse to FBA. And then we have WFS, and then we have 3PLs. The way you can send product into these, you can be very quality. We can AWD and FD to 3PL, or AWD sends into FBA, or obviously your 3PL, your own warehouse, can ship to them. There's three primary ways to ship from the staging to the distribution centers. The three primary ways, I'm going to write them right here since that's one of the only places we have, is basically FTL, which LTL, and then we have ground, basically. So ground, we get back to the same options we mentioned earlier for if we wanted to technically ship from staging to customer, but ideally to optimize for its cost savings, we should be shipping from the DC to the customer. So FTL, we right now a provider that we're using for FTL and LTL that's also great, that we're also not paid for, is Amazon Freight. They launched it recently. They're offering very competitive rates. We're getting truckloads for $700-800. Very tough to beat that. LTL, we're getting some LTLs. Also, Amazon Freight offers LTLs, but Amazon also, for ground and LTL, they have partnered carriers. So the partnered carrier for Amazon is UPS. You can choose your non-partnered carrier. You can go to DHL and to ship to the FBA, WFS, or 3PL, but it's usually very expensive. But non-partnered carriers, you can also go to FTL, LTL. We have many providers that help us with that. Uber Freight is a very famous option. We've had a good experience with them. Sometimes they're slower, but they're very, very good with rates. So That's LTL to ship into the distribution centers. Obviously, each one comes with its own time requirements. But over here, you're also looking at possibly ground. Could be to reach to the end fulfillment center. It could take, for example, 2 to 3 weeks to check into FBA. LTL, a little bit longer actually, 3 to 4 weeks. And this one is a very good, especially if you have a live load, you can experience 24 to 48 hours. It's crazy. So you have to know when you can afford each one. 3 to 4 weeks is on the long end again, but these are much more longer than FTL. Usually when you're shipping a full truckload that's designated for you, it checks in. If you get a live load, you can, otherwise you get a drop trailer. That's obviously going to make it much longer because it's waiting in Amazon's parking lot to be checked in. And I'm specifically mentioning Amazon on purpose. So just to give you an idea of how complicated supply chain can be, and going back to the dates and timelines, factory, something can take maybe 4 to 8 weeks to produce. So let's just do the math over here. So 4 to 8 weeks. And then clearing custom, so shipping, we said, let's say FCL and LCL, those are the most common options. That's another 3 to 4 weeks, right? And then after that, we have it clearing the ports. That can take anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks. If you get audited, good luck, that could double or triple. So we have it clearing the ports. Going from the ports to the staging, that's possibly another 2 to 3 weeks. And because staging, that's where you're storing it. And then going to this, again, you can technically ship also from the factory to the distribution center by using AGL to FBA. But I'm just assuming that you want to optimize for costs. Usually it's not as effective. So we said from the ports to the staging, that's an additional 2 to 3 weeks. And then staging to distribution center, let's just call that 1 to 2 weeks. And then obviously if you're at FBA, then the customer can order at any time, 1 to 2 weeks. But I just want to assume that if you wanted to go the cost-effective route, how many weeks in advance do you have to plan? So over here we have 7, 8, 10, 11 weeks. And then on this option on the long end, we have 12, 14, 17, 19. 11 to 19 weeks you have to order in advance. So if your inventory is projected to run out in 19 weeks, if you order today, you could be just on the cusp of making it there. So 19 weeks divided by 4, that's around 3 to 4 months. That's also obviously known as lead time. So that's where you can see how complex it gets. Now, technically, can you make that 1 or 2 weeks? If you air freight it to a FBA, you can't. If you air freight it, let's say just to your warehouse, yes, you can, but good luck paying thousands of dollars more and paying more to expedite things and all that kind of stuff. But there's some stuff that just take time, like the factory producing or whatever. So keep that in mind while you're thinking about lead time. That's why it's hard to optimize inventories at times, because you have to consider a lot of stuff that you can control, but then there's stuff that you can't control, like clearing the ports, etc. Now I'm going to be going to other common mistakes. Obviously, I mentioned a lot, but another common one is using FBA for the staging. So a lot of people go for the simpler option. They ship from the factory, AGL to FBA, or a freight forwarder to FBA. And the issue with that is that FBA charges so much for storage, especially in Q4. You're paying, I think we once measured it, the 3PL storage compared to FBA storage. FBA storage, I don't want to say the number wrong, but I believe it's 87 cents a cubic foot. 3PL storage, when you're paying $13 a pallet a month, you're paying 2 to 3 cents a cubic foot. So it's 40 times per cubic foot extra charge. So the same item you might be paying, let's say 50 cents a month to store in FBA, you could be paying 2 cents a month to store at a 3PL. So do not use FBA or WFS or even your own warehouse if it's smaller for storing inventory. You have to make sure that you're storing it the right place and it's going there. The other option is not recognizing the marketplace you're on. So, for example, people, they want to sell on Target and eBay. Target and eBay, for Target, actually, it's against their terms of service to MCF products to their customers. They don't want to risk their customers knowing that the product came from Amazon. It ruins their reputation. So understanding those dynamics, and even for your own website, let's say you're relying on FBA for all of your distribution. Let's say the Amazon, they suspend your account, God forbid, or something happens, then you can't even ship your own D2C customer, direct Shopify customers, or your account, you can't access it for some reason. Then your whole customer base is impacted. So not having your inventory in numerous centers, let's say you're at a 3PL, they go bankrupt, or you're having issues with them in terms, you don't have inventory at another place, like your own warehouse or FBA or WFS, now you're stuck. They basically, you're basically can't do anything at that time. So having inventory in numerous places, obviously understanding the lead time is huge and comparing that to cost. So let's say if you're gonna run out of stock on something, you have to start looking at air freight options. You can't, like right now, you didn't even mention rail. Rail would add another week or two to this, but that's only if you have time and you can afford that option. So you have to understand, you have to balance the lead time that you have and the cost that it's going to cost, basically, and dynamically choose those as well. Another thing that you have to dynamically do is always have these guys bid against each other. When we're going LTL, we took a look at Amazon's partnered carrier LTL rate, we look at Uber Freight, we look at some people that we have that we know, even AGL. We look at AGL, but we also look at freight forwarders. Sometimes they're cheaper, and we tell them, listen, this guy's cheaper, can you do this for me? We look at the time they offer, the price they offer, etc. So having different partners, basically different vendor options bidding against each other, is always a good option. Don't take one for granted. Just recently we took a certain LTL carrier for granted, and our basically purchase order manager didn't bid for a while, for a few weeks. Later on they checked, we actually noticed that we bid a few shipments, we almost shaved $30 a pallet. When we're shipping 40, 50 pallets a week, let's say, 30 times 40, that's $1,200 a week. Multiply that by year, that's 70, 80 grand, just by not bidding. So we made an SOP that you always have to bid between 2 or 3 carriers. We can substitute them, we try out new people, but we're always bidding. Regardless of where you're selling your product on the day, the marketplace, we obviously mentioned various marketplaces to sell on. Your supply chain is your profit chain. That's where you have to make sure your profit is made there. A lot of cost savings can happen at various stages. It takes a lot of time to forecast, inventory, purchasing, all that kind of stuff. So make sure that you have a very close look at it. You're continuously analyzing. It's been a huge focus for us. We've saved hundreds of thousands of dollars this year, and we're continuing to push that more significantly to get faster, cheaper, and even more quality, better. So that's something that I'm consistently pushing. It's going top down, and I hope that you're evaluating for yourself. If you have any more questions about supply chain, feel free to visit us at vodera.com, speak to an expert. We also can check out our other videos on selling stuff. We talked about ads. You can watch the 3 common PPC mistakes here, and leave a like and subscribe and comment.